episode 17 with Jason Petty. Just got off the road with Jason doing a Western Canada tour, and it was a lot of fun. Jason's a fabulous singer, great storyteller. He's been working the role as Hank Williams Sr. for quite a long time. He's got lots of great history on Hank and the whole country music industry, and I think you'd really enjoy this conversation. So sit back, relax, let's get it rolling. Okay, we're rolling.
Right on.
Hey, Jason Petty.
What's happening, Darren Walters?
It's nice that you took some time to come on the podcast. We're on tour in Western Canada and doing the Lonesome Tour, tribute to Hank Williams. It's been a lot of fun.
It has. It is a lonesome tour. It's me and you in the car.
I know. Yeah, Brian's gone now, so it's just the two of us. And it's actually kind of neat. It's different, a different tour with just doing a solo thing. Obviously, you do a lot of different shows, but this one is a solo tour. And it's different. You just hop in the vehicle and away you go. Setup is quick.
Right.
Quick.
I've been doing this for like 22 years, and I've been very hesitant to ever do it as a solo project, even though Hank Williams, the singer-songwriter, his music really lends itself more to just a man and his guitar, because that's really what Hank was in essence. Everything stripped away, all the talk of legend and alcohol and all this other kind of stuff. It was just a man and his guitar and his brilliance, and that's what we bring to the stage. And I was very hesitant to do it, and then in 2016. The National World War II Museum in New Orleans, Louisiana, called me, and they have a little cabaret theater there. Oh. And they said, we don't want the band. We just want like a one-man show from people from that era, just post-World War II. And that's what Hank was. 1946 was his first hit. So I said, okay. And I was scared to death. Boy, I was more scared than I was standing on stage off Broadway in New York City or at the Ryman. I was scared to death because it was me. Yeah. I couldn't fall back on, hit it, guys. If you start messing up, you can turn around and go, hit it, boys. Well, this time I'm the boy. And so I had to hit it. But it went over great. It went over great, and it has really taken off because, like I said, his stuff lends itself more to the one-man show. Yeah, I know when Brian and I decided to do the tour the first time, we did a small run last year. We had that conversation a few times because how do you advertise it to make sure people know? And I don't think half the time people coming in, they know it's going to be a solo show. And, you always wonder, well, are people going to complain? That it's just a single guy. Maybe they're expecting a full band, big production. And not a peep from anybody. And I think the show just lends itself so well that way. No one ever even questions it, and it works really well. So, well, and that's my grandmother's fault. I have the gift of gab when I'm on stage in front of people. I know the subject matter so well, and I know because I was told all these stories personally by people like Don Helms, Hank's steel guitar player and best friend. And he's one of the guys that, you say has never met an enemy. Well, he never had. Everybody was friends. At Don's funeral, I bet had 5,000 people there. I mean, they were packed. They were lined up outside. They had to put it on loudspeakers outside the funeral home. Such a great guy. And I knew these stories from all the people I've met over the years, and I started writing the stories down. So luckily, telling the story behind the legend of Hank Williams and trying to make him a human being with humor, and with personal insight and things like that, I think it gives a lot of weight to the music, even more so than just, the legendary songs themselves. Now you've got a backdrop, of what was going on in his life when he wrote I'm So Lonesome I Could Cry, or when he wrote Your Cheating Heart, or, those great songs. So it has turned out much better. But I had, you guys had a couple of conversations over probably a 2-month period. I had conversations in my own head for 20 years, before, okay, I'll do it. It was just a very nerve-wracking thing that suddenly, you've always leaned on. I came from theater first before I got into music. And you leaned on your, if you got a great actor across from you, oh man, you can really turn it on and get it going and get somebody to bounce it off of. You got a band behind you, man, you can really get into that music thing and really, you don't have to, the lyrics don't need to mean as much if you've got a rocking band.
Yeah.
But then suddenly it's you and your guitar, and sometimes I forget to turn it on. Like the other day.
That was kind of like, oh, I guess we're even now. Almost.
Right. I was like, you guys can't hear me, can you? And they went, no. I went, there's a switch back here I can see.
That's funny. Well, let's go back, as you say in your show, back to the beginning. And Jason Petty, where were you born, Jason?
I was born in Manchester, Tennessee, the town in which I have moved back to raise my own family.
Yeah. So how long did you stay there?
I was in Manchester until I went to college. I went to college at age 18, and I was in Knoxville, Tennessee at the University of Tennessee for 4 years, graduated, and went straight to work for Pfizer Pharmaceuticals and worked there for 3 years.
So were you singing at a young age?
No.
I
mean, when I was a kid, I was a huge Elvis fan. I got to see him in concert, in like 1974, and I went nuts. The first record my mother ever bought me was a record called Elvis Country. So it was Elvis country, singing country music.
Yeah.
And I sang in church choir. I got into the church. I started work in a little town called Franklin, Tennessee, right out of college, and that's where I was based for my Pfizer job. And I went to the United Methodist Church there and got involved in the choir, and that was my first real chance at singing. And I had entered talent shows before, but it was just as a fun thing to do and to meet girls.
Yeah. And what about acting? Were you doing any acting before then as well, or is that something you fell into as well?
It all started in Franklin, that little town. I went to church and got involved in the choir, and then one of my doctors in Franklin, well, he was in Nashville, but he lived in Franklin, and he and I were talking. We were having dinner one night, and he said, we've got this little theater in Franklin called Players, and we're doing Once Upon a Mattress, which is what made Carol Burnett famous, Mm-hmm. It's The Princess and the Pea, basically. And they said, we need somebody who can sing because our minstrel dropped out. And he said, would you do it? And I was like, whoa, wait a minute. I said, I've never been on stage other than a stupid high school talent show, So yeah, I'll do it. It was kind of that decision. Yeah. He was my doctor, and I didn't want to, he was buying from me. Yeah. So, he was buying my pharmaceutical stuff, and I was like, well, sure, I'll do it. And got in there and got involved with those theater people who were so sweet to me. And I had a visit from them. I was playing a show in Crossville, Tennessee, and they drove 3 hours, whole group of people from Players to come see the show, and it was like old home week. Yeah. But that's where I got involved in acting, and I guess you could say since it was a musical, I got involved in singing.
So what was that first show like for you? You remember doing the first one?
I remember I had to wear tights. That's all I remember about that. And I was thinking, good Lord, please, that's just my whole reason for singing the talent shows was to pick up women, and it didn't work in tights. So, that was, I say that, that wasn't my real reason. My real reason was it was fun. It was fun. It was, it's an escape from the rest of the world, because just being at the job and grinding all day and, getting up at 3 to be at the hospital by 5 and, you finish up and you're done at like 4 p.m, and you're ready for bed. And that was the life. And I was 23 and 24 years old. And so I did it as an escape. And while I was doing local theater there and singing in the church choir, my choir minister, one of his best friends was one of the piano players, the accompanist at Opryland Show Park in Nashville, Tennessee. Yeah. And he said, you need to audition for this guy. And I did. And they signed me to a weekend-only contract for a first year, and that was 1990. And so I'm working for Pfizer. I'm doing plays at Pull Tight, and now I'm singing Saturdays and Sundays at the Opryland Show Park in a show called Country Music USA. That's where I was first introduced to Hank Williams.
That was so that was one of their main shows there, right?
Yeah, it was their bread and butter.
Yeah.
It was the main one. Yeah.
I remember going to Opryland Theme Park years ago. Obviously, it's been closed for a while, but I loved that place. It was, if you were into country music, or if you liked country music, even if you didn't, it didn't really matter. But if you did, that was a great place to go. It was kind of it was a theme park, not really many rides, right?
Right.
But it was based around music. You'd walk around, there'd be all these different shows that you could go to on, how many a day would there be?
Well, we had, during the summer, there were 8 shows of Country Music USA. We had 2 casts. So you'd do 4 shows, and then the other cast would come in, and they'd do 4 shows.
How long the shows would they be?
55 minutes.
Yeah.
No
Still
show.
long enough for a theme park.
This was outdoors.
Yeah.
If you've ever been to Nashville in the summer,
It's hot.
oh my gosh. And you're out there, and you're in polyester, and, you're making quick changes, and you're coming out there. And back then, we didn't have wireless mics, so we had a full 3 days of what we called mic dressing rehearsals, so that you didn't get a big giant knot, because we had 16 cast members on stage. We had 16 vocal mics on one stage, and to get them not
To cross.
I mean, we had 3 days of just that. We didn't sing. We said, okay,
unreal.
you go from point A to point B, you hand your mic off with your left hand, take this other mic with your right hand, put it behind your back under your leg, and hand it to the piano player, and he passes it over. It was amazing.
Yeah, that's bizarre. You don't think about that. You just think, well, wireless mics, but you wouldn't think of that organization you would need with that many vocalists because that would be a mess. I mean,
It was.
yeah, I've seen shows that try to do that, even with 4 singers, and it ends up being a mess. But yeah, it would have had been a lot of work.
Well, these guys knew their stuff, and the directors, Joe Gerles and Matt Davenport, and Matt still runs a production company, Matt Davenport Productions. And now they all, now he told me, he said, it's so much greater now. We all have wireless, technology. But he said, because those 3 days they were wasted days from a rehearsal standpoint, because you had to do it, because you didn't want to end up with a giant knot at the end. But, Opryland called themselves not a theme park, but a show park.
Yeah.
Because that's what they were built on. Yeah. And we had a rock and roll show. We had a Broadway show. We had a sort of cowboy Western show that had a little storyline to it. I was in it for a while, called Way Out West. It had Easter in Song and Story over at the Grand Ole Opry House. I was a part of that. I was St. Peter, believe it or not. It had Christmas shows. They were open at Christmas too, and I remember how cold it got, and we'd do shows there. It was a what I called college for singers, musicians. It gave a lot of musicians who came to Nashville who otherwise couldn't get their foot in the door a place to work, while they got, you got to pay your dues in Nashville. You got to play the honky tonks and the bars for tips, because they don't pay.
Yeah.
And as a singer, you go there and you find out, you know what, you're at the back of the line, because there's like 10,000 singers who are just as good, if not better than you. And they're in front of the line. They know all these other people. They've made the connections. And now you got to... So I labored there for 5 years, and doing my thing.
So in that show, what were you doing? What type of music were you doing? Obviously country, but...
Country Music USA is a history of country music. So, I came on... I think the first guy I did was Bill Monroe from Bluegrass. And then, of course... at times I've done, over 5 years, you end up doing everybody. But I did Bill Monroe, I did Roy Acuff, I did Jimmy Rogers, I did Hank Williams, I did Jim Reeves. And then I did, one of the guys from Alabama, the Oak Ridge Boys, tons of, I've done them all. I've done Vince Gill and a bunch of other guys that I can't even remember. Heck, and then I went and did my favorite show, which was called I Hear America Singing, which is a history of music in America, from the United States from the 1920s up till present day. And I got to do Archie Bunker.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and I got to do everybody. I did Bruce Springsteen in that show. Wow, that was great.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you ran the musical gamut, and that's where I sort of learned what little I know how to read music now. That's where I learned to play guitar.
Yeah.
You're around people who really want to be in the music business, who really know their stuff when they get there. And I didn't know my stuff when I got there. I was some kid who was doing, local theater and doing Pfizer. But of course, after the first year at Opryland, just doing weekends only, they offered me a yearly contract, and I had to make a big decision to stay with Pfizer or to pursue the dream, and I pursued.
That probably was a tough decision.
It was a very tough decision because my father was an engineer, and he's a great man and smart, and his number one priority was getting a solid, steady job to take care of your family.
Yeah.
At the time, I was single. I didn't have a family, and I said, well, I'm going to step out here and do this and see what happens. And, after 5 years, and nothing really was happening except you got rehired, and you had a job every year, and the pay wasn't great. It wasn't nearly as good as it was at Pfizer.
Yeah.
That was the real decision. At the end of 1994, I had a massive decision to make because, you were kind of just running in place.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone was cutting demos and pitching them, and one out of every 1,000 or 2,000 maybe gets a shot at even talking about a record deal, much less getting it. So it was sort of running in place, and I was picked to do a show called I Hear America Singing. I was cast, and the director's name was Ted Swinley. And Ted Swinley wrote the play Always Patsy Cline, which has played everywhere. And he and I became fast friends, and I told him, I've been here for almost 5 years, and I really think I should get back in and try to get back with Pfizer and get my job back and see what I can do. And he said, well, didn't you sing Hank Williams in Country Music USA a couple years ago? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, the Ryman has asked me to write a show about the life of Hank Williams, similar to the Always Patsy Cline. They want to put it in there. He said, why don't you stick around for another season and be in I Hear America Singing? Let me direct you, and let me work on this play, and you can do the reading for it, and we'll see what happens, because I think something really good could come of this.
Yeah.
And it did. They didn't use the play he wrote. They went and bought one that had already been written by Randy Myler and Mark Harlick called Lost Highway. Yeah. But they let Ted direct it, so Ted cast me without any audition.
Oh.
So that was the easiest gig I ever got, and the rest is history, as they say. One thing led to another, and here I am.
So, the heater's going on in the room here. I know. Whenever you do a remote podcast, that's always the thing. The air conditioning's running or the heater's running. It just sounds like noise in the background. That's all right.
White noise.
Yeah. So, it's pretty neat. I mean, here you go from a guy who never sang when he was growing up, didn't have a band, didn't, play the bars and do all that stuff. And you jump into playing at Opryland and doing that for a bunch of years. And all of a sudden, the Hank thing comes along. And Ted there, that's pretty neat that he probably was writing that show and had you probably didn't want to have to say, because he didn't know for sure that would be your part, but probably was writing that knowing that you'd be the guy, even though they didn't go with that particular show. It's pretty neat that you just kind of got that part, and that was a big part.
Well, it was really cool. It was really cool that he thought that much of me, that he, went out on a limb, because they could have said, wow, that guy is a terrible Hank, because I'm sure in the beginning, I've gotten a ton better since then.
Yeah.
But your first shot at anything, I remember my first audition at Opryland, I had already been cast in the show, and then all the men got to audition for all the men parts. Every guy, you got a shot at it.
Yeah.
And the Hank Williams thing came up, and they wanted to do Lovesick Blues. None of us could yodel.
Oh, yeah.
I couldn't yodel then. I'd never tried. You know, I never sang for one thing, and then here I am trying to yodel. And so, you know, they wanted me to do the part because I looked like him.
Yeah.
And they wanted me to do the part, and so they changed the song to Your Cheating Heart, where he doesn't yodel. And I did that for a year, and my director, Matt Davenport, I remember, took me aside, and Joe Gerls as well, and said, learn to yodel for next year. Learn to yodel. And I did, and the next year they put Lovesick Blues in, and that helped immensely because they were all very helpful at Opryland. They were very much in teacher mode. And I was in student mode again, you know, and you try to soak it up. Yeah. You know, the big decision at age 22 and 23 is to grow up.
Yeah.
Is to get serious. You can play along like you're still in college or you're still in high school and, you know, try to do talent shows to pick up chicks, you know, and that kind of stuff. But I remember there was a point there amidst Opryland where you're among other people your age, where it's a party atmosphere sometimes, where you have to say, I have to take this seriously.
Yeah.
Something has to happen here, or I need to go back to the real world job, you know. And they were very helpful in why I say it's a college for singers. You had teachers, and you know, in every facet of life, you've got a chance, but you have to take the reins in hand, you know, and do it yourself. And you have to pay attention, and you have to be willing to learn.
So going back to yodeling, how'd you learn how to do that?
I listened to Hank do it. I listened to Hank do it and just tried. It's really, I had to learn what a head voice was, you know. You know, you don't have a music background. All these terms that now are so, you know,
common.
Yeah, they're so common to us, like head voice. Well, that's like going, you know, flipping way up. You usually sing from down deep into your diaphragm. You just flip it all up into your head and your nasal cavity, and it's a much lighter sound, but there's a real flip, and that's called, you know, and I had to learn to do that flip in order to yodel. And to some people it comes naturally, but to me I had to work on it. Now it comes naturally because people ask me, you know, wow, that I have to throw the Hank voice all on my vocal cords in order to make it sound like Hank, because that's the way he sang. He sang just all throat and face and nasal cavity. But to listen to him talk, he had a very deep, resonant baritone voice. But when he sang, it was very shrill and it was in your face. And it was perfect for his music. But for me to do that, you know, I would do a show, Lost Highway, wherein, you know, I had 50% of the acting, and I had 90% of the singing, and then I had to play guitar in it as well, which, you know, I was still a fledgling guitar player. Thank goodness it was Hank Williams music, you know, the 1-4-5 formula. But I would be just vocally wasted. I would be talking like this after every show.
Oh yeah.
You know, your voice is just shot.
Yeah.
Eventually, your muscles catch up if you do it enough. And now people will say, how do you stand up doing that one-man show and you talk and you sing and you play with no accompaniment and no hesitation for 2 hours? And I said, well, you do it for 22 years. You're either going to fall on your face dead, or you're going to get stronger. And, you know, I got stronger.
Yeah. So going back to the Ryman, you get that part. How long do you work? As I know it ran a long time. What about pre-production? Was it a long time getting that together, or did it start pretty quickly?
Well, the thing is that, you know, we had a complete script in front of us right then. I was told 6 months before we started. The show started in May, and I was actually told in December of 1995 that I had the gig, but to keep it to myself, because they wanted to do a big January, after the holidays, they wanted to do a big press conference and things. And as soon as that press conference was done, I took it upon myself to go down to the Country Music Hall of Fame and talk to them, tell them what I was doing. And they had seen the press conference, so they opened up the archives, and Harold Bradley, you know, Owen Bradley's son, and Jerry Bradley as well. They all gave me pointers, and they said, you need to go listen to these. These are in the archives. Nobody's ever heard these songs, which were demos of Hank, and just Hank and his guitar. These were demos he would send to Fred Rose. Fred Rose would take the song and sort of mold it and say, we need to do this, and let's key change here instead of there. And Your Cheating Heart sounds nothing like the completed version, his original Your Cheating Heart. If you could listen to the demo of Your Cheating Heart that Hank sang.
Yeah.
It's amazing things like that. I went to Montgomery. I went to Georgiana, Alabama, his boyhood home museum there. I talked with cousins. I talked with friends. I talked with family members, trying to get to know Hank as a human so I could play him as an actor.
Yeah.
And then, the funniest story is the day after the press conference, I got a phone call. Now, I'm living in a one-bedroom apartment in Nashville, Tennessee, and, this is before cell phones. I had a pager. Ooh.
Yeah.
I was big time back then. I had a pager. Well, my home phone rang, and I answered it, and she said, is this Mr. Jason Petty? And I said, yes, it is. And she said, well, this is Kitty Wells. And my first thing I did was eye roll, and I thought it was a friend of mine, Brenda, calling and messing with me. And so I said, it's very funny, Brenda. Thank you very much for calling, and I'll be right over, sure, no problem. Click, and I hung up and kept watching TV or whatever I was doing. And she called right back, and she goes, I know you think this is a joke, but it's really not. This is Kitty Wells. She's the queen of country music, if you don't know who Kitty Wells is. And it sort of hit me that I believed her.
Yeah.
She's Kitty Wells. We want you to come sing with me and my husband Johnny and our son Jack, and we're doing this show at our church, and I don't know how I spoke. But I told her yes, and she said, just do a few Hank songs, and I'd been practicing them already and playing to the records, and I went and I got to meet Kitty Wells, and she was friends with Hank and his wife Audrey. Mm-hmm. Her and her husband Johnny were friends with him, and she opened up about their marital woes between Hank and Audrey, and what kind of person Hank was, what kind of person Audrey was. I want to backtrack real quick, because while I was at Opryland, I got my first big chance to do the Grand Ole Opry.
Yeah.
And I was introduced on the Opry by Roy Acuff, who is the king of country music. And I sang Lovesick Blues, and I was really nervous, and my hand was shaking. And Mr. Roy saw it, and he came up and he held my hand for the whole rest of the performance, and I calmed right down, boy.
Wow.
I was like, I looked up at the sky, and I'm standing on the stage of the Grand Ole Opry, and I said, God, you can take me now. I've done it all.
Yeah.
But getting to meet those people, and Mr. Roy, he talked to me about Hank, and he said he was a very troubled man, but he said he had a good heart, he had a great voice, he was a real talent, and he said something to me. He said, Hank wasn't meant to be on this earth that long. He was meant to burn really bright but really short.
Yeah.
That's the way the Lord intended it. And I really have taken that to heart when people say, wow, if Hank had only lived 20 or 30 more years. And I said, well, maybe it'd have done like a lot of the other stars. The country music business is very fickle. Yeah. If you get 5 years out of the country music business, that's the cream of the crop there. Because suddenly they forget about you and they move on to something else. And it doesn't matter. You stick around. They forgot about George Jones. They forgot about Merle Haggard. The guys still toured and did their thing, but, major play radio just forgot them after a little while.
Yeah. That's a neat call that you got from Kitty Wells.
Yeah, that was, it was funny, and I would get phone calls immediately after that I go to do the show with Kitty, and sitting on the front row is Don Helms and his wife Hazel and Jerry Rivers. And Don Helms was his steel guitar player, and Jerry Rivers was Hank's fiddle player. Hank Williams band members is what I'm talking about. And they're sitting there, and I recognize them from pictures. So not only am I nervous enough being on stage with Kitty and Jack, and then there's Don, there's the Driftin' Cowboys. That's the name of Hank's band. There's two of them sitting right there. And then a couple days later, my phone rings and it's Hillis Buttram. And he said, let's go to dinner and let's talk about Hank. And I was like, okay. And Jerry invited me over to his house, and me and him and Don sat there, and their wives were there, and they talked about Hank and Audrey and played some old recordings that no one had ever heard before. And then Don picks up the phone and says, hey, can you bring some of Hank's stuff over here? Yeah, bring his guitar and his hat and one of his suits. Just I got Jason Petty over here. He's getting ready to do the Lost Highway at the Ryman. Yeah, bring her too. And he hung up, and 30 minutes later, Marty Stewart and Connie Smith came over, and there I am sitting there going, what has happened to this little kid from Tennessee, whose grandparents owned a farm and
working at Pfizer.
I was working at Pfizer about 5 years ago and having fun and doing all kinds of stuff. Now I'm having a blast and learning, and things happen for a reason. I'm a big believer in fate and destiny and following the right path, and it just seemed like all the signs were pointing, go this way.
Yeah.
Go this way. I'll give you a little nudge, but you got to decide to do it yourself. And it has worked out so far.
Going back to Katie Wells real quick, it was years ago. We were doing a TV show with my family, the Walters family, and Katie Wells was our special guest on the show. So obviously we were doing a bunch of pre-recording for the TV show, and we needed to do a pre-record for Katie Wells, and she was up in the area doing some shows. So Brian was booking her at and arranged for her to come over to the studio I was working at and recorded. We sat in the studio and I recorded Honky Tonk Angels, and I'll never forget that. I can put myself back there right now. No headphones. No, nothing. They just sat around in a semicircle. I mic'd everything up, and they kicked it off, and they've played it a million times. But, I sat there, and I still think how many people had recorded her singing that song. Mm-hmm. Not many. And I still hold that as a real, special moment that I just kind of hold to myself, because even the guys at the studio, I don't think they understood what a big deal that was, and they weren't hanging around. They were up front, and I did my thing, and yeah, it was pretty cool. I'm thinking, God,
it's history,
and and they laid it down, and it just felt, man, it just, the tones and the way they sang, the way they played using her band, and it was unlike any other recording I've ever done in my life, and it just turned things up, and it sounded just like the original, and it was pretty cool. I'd give anything to go back. I wish there was some type of recording of that, or I know the masters will be somewhere. I don't even have that. It will be on the TV show. I could pull it off of that, but
well, it's history. It's
yeah.
It's that song changed the world for women in country music. That's why she's called the Queen of Country Music. She opened that door. I mean, if it weren't for her and the Carter family with Sarah and Mother Maybelle and a lady by the name of Patsy Montana, with I Want to Be a Cowboy Sweetheart, they had to kick down, and I mean, they really had to wrestle the doors away from the men and then kick them in, and then continue to show that women could be a powerful force in the country music industry, because it was songs written by men, for men, and sang by men, and recorded by men, and the producers and the record executives and radio people, they were all men. It was a male-dominated society industry back then, and even that the subject matter of that song, it's an answer song to a Hank Thompson song, "The Wild Side of Life," where he blames the honky tonks for the woman for deciding to be a honky tonk angel or whatever, and he didn't know God made honky tonk angels. And she came back and said, God didn't make honky tonk angels. It's usually a man that drives us to go there. And I thought that was such a great, take that, you bum, And I mean, Hank Thompson's a great guy, and he didn't take any offense to it. I mean, it's for him, it was a song, but Kitty didn't even want to, she didn't want to record it. she was a studio singer at the time, and she was about to retire out of the music industry altogether, and she was still singing demos. And she went and sang that demo, and they said, "Oh, man, you gotta stick with this." And she did, thankfully for all of us.
It's crazy.
Yeah. That's another thing that these people that I got to meet, like Don Helms and Jerry Rivers and all these folks, it's important to remember the history of country music, because it was a music, it was a music culture.
Yeah.
It was a music of the people. It was common man and woman's music. It was the tale of their life, their struggles, the hardships, the fun times, the sad times, loss of life, death, all this. It was everything, and they sang about these things, and it meant something. And I say it in my show. My dad used to say, "This is the music that has meat on its bones." Well, it is for a certain culture, for a certain part of, there's some people who can't relate to it at all. And I get that. I can't relate to there are different types of music I don't relate to at all. But I get it, that it's important to them. And this one is very important to a lot of people. And that helped. Being around it, I think, in being at the Ryman was such a historic place, and being surrounded by all these, history-making stars of the early days of country music, and having them come to you and telling you, "Thank you for doing this. Thank you for doing this." You don't know what that means to a young guy. I was still just a kid. I was in my late 20s, and you're still a kid in your late 20s, believe it or not, and you're going, "Well, what am I doing that's so good? What am I doing that's so great?" And then finally, as you get older, you get it.
Yeah.
You get it. You're making people happy. You're bringing back great memories of a simpler time for them. And it's something very important to them, and you don't need to take it for granted. It's easy to get caught up in, "Gosh, I've been on tour for 6 months and I'm tired, and can we cut like 4 songs out of the show tonight? They won't tell the difference." Well, no, but you'll know the difference.
Yeah.
And one of these days, it's going to come and kick you in the butt.
So going back to doing the show at the Ryman, what was that first show like?
Scary.
Yeah.
I don't remember much. I remember being scared. I remember not having any saliva in my mouth. It's just like cotton. I could drink 6 bottles of water before the show, and then you get 10 minutes in and you have to go to the bathroom. So you go, "Well, crap, I got another hour to go before I can get a break," because I was on stage the entire time. So I remember it being filled with all the record industry people, all the music songwriter people, and all the big country opry artist people. That's about all. And my parents, my parents were there. My grandmother was there. Everybody that had influenced me as a kid.
Yeah.
And it was just, it was an amazing night. But you're so scared. Apparently your memory doesn't grasp and hold.
Yeah.
It goes, "Oh my God, we got through that. Whew, all right, next."
Yeah, it's like a filter when you're in that position. It just, all your energy goes to getting through the show. And there's almost like certain parts of your brain shut off to kind of give more energy to, keeping focused and doing your
Exactly.
thing.
It's a lot like, like we were talking about being on the road the other day. Some days, for that 2 hours, life is grand. I'm on stage and people are loving it, and you're singing and you're playing. It's the 22 hours where you have to jump on the plane and go through security and take your shoes and your belt and all this stuff off, and then grab your suitcase and make sure your guitar doesn't get broken in flight, and then sit there for 2 hours while the flight is delayed, or maybe, and it's the grind of loading in and setting up, and you put your head down and you do it. You put your head down and you do it. And for that opening night at the Ryman, we had rehearsed enough that I said, if I don't know it by now, I'll never know it.
Yeah.
So put your head down, get in that place, because as an actor, you have to become that person. So you get inside that person's head, and you've got this whole aura filter around you, and you shut out the outside world. And that's that fifth wall they talk about, or whatever it is, between you and the audience.
Yeah.
You are suddenly in a very tiny space in a different time, and you're a different person, so you have to think differently and speak differently. And I think once you snap out of that, then you can take in all of the, oh man, this was a great night and it was wonderful and all these stars are here. And I remember more about the after party than I do about the on stage part of it.
Yeah, because you're relaxing and
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So how long did you do that show for?
I did that particular version of the show because we had to sanitize that version for the Ryman. Because, Hank's life wasn't, all fairies and butterflies and, it was some hard, dark things, sex and danger and cursing and drinking, it's all that was there, just like anybody else's life, you got the good with the bad. So we had to sanitize it a little bit for the Ryman, and then we did that for 2 years at the Ryman.
How many shows do you know? Do you know?
Wow, we did I think 4 shows every weekend for 6 months. So I don't know what that comes out to. Yeah. And then you take the winter off and you come back the next May, and it was during that interim period that I did my first road tour of it, and we did I think 6 weeks in Edmonton, Alberta. Up here, and that was my first introduction to Canadian audiences. Yeah. And lo and behold, 22 years later, a guy shows up 2 nights ago at the show and goes, "I saw you in Edmonton." And I was like, "Oh my God." It's pretty cool. Yeah. And then a lady shows up last night that had seen me at the Ryman, and she's coming back to see the next 2 shows that we're doing here. And so, it's just amazing that we did that Ted Swinley Lost Highway version for 2 years at the Ryman Auditorium, and then from there we went on a couple of national tours, and that took up. I went to Norway, and I started doing. People will start asking, want to book you, but just do the music. They don't want you to do the play. Yeah. And so that's when I started getting in my head. You probably need to come up with a show that's just music based. And not a play, not an actor thing. So that's when I started formulating, putting a band together and going out and doing some dates on my own. And that's when the first inkling of that happened.
Did you feel at all putting that show together was in conflict of what you were doing and maybe people wouldn't like that? Or it was so separate it didn't really matter? You know what I mean? Is there something going through your mind? Because I know if you're doing a show and you're working on it and then you're pulling away to do your own version of something that you're doing, you have that risk of, ticking somebody off, right?
You do. I mean, you do. But I was friends enough. I had made friends enough now with Merle Kilgore, who was Hank Williams Jr. manager and sort of the head of that part of the estate. And I have become friends with Jet Williams, who's Hank's daughter. Yeah. And they were very encouraging. Yeah, go out and do it, because every time you go do it, the interest in Hank Williams soars. And we sell albums, and the Hank Williams estate still makes millions of dollars every year because Hank's music is timeless. It's a little different than everybody. He's sort of the Elvis of country music, Yeah. You got a pretty steady line of what his record sales are going to be next year, and they're not going to decline or go up that much. They're going to stay fairly steady. You can count on that money, is what I'm saying from the estate's point of view. So they're very encouraging of keeping his name out there, keeping his legend alive, keeping his music alive. But in the end, as an actor, even when we were rehearsing the show, we had the motto of it's about the music, stupid. That was our motto, is if we mess everything else up, let's get the music right. Yeah. Because that you boil it down to its base alloy, and it's Hank Williams' lyrics and his style and the music surrounding it that made it so great. The story, is what it is, and you try to do that to the best of your ability. Based upon your knowledge, and you can't vary from the script, so you don't have any control over that content. You just have control over how you deliver it. And when I went out on my own, I knew I had stacks of stories written from these people everyone wanted to tell me their Hank Williams story. Everyone, every waitress, every record executive, every songwriter who got interested in music because they heard a Hank Williams song. Yeah. I mean, Don Helms had his favorite Hank stories, but the people that knew him best wanted me to keep him human, keep him human. He's such a legend now, and everyone tries to make Hank the greatest this, and when Hank drank, he drank more than the population of New Zealand combined. No, he didn't.
Yeah.
He didn't drink that much. It just, it was everything else.
Yeah.
He combined it with pills, and at the end, and it was just, it was just one of those situations where everybody wanted me to make sure I got it right and made Hank a human being, and let's just honor him for his music, and that's what we do.
So doing the show at the Ryman, obviously you must have had a lot of country music, folk singers come out to see the show. I know you mentioned in your show now that you have people like Alan Jackson, George Jones,
Porter Wagner.
Yeah. What was that like?
Little Jimmy Dickens. I mean, Little Jimmy Dickens and Carl Smith came together. And if you know anything about Carl Smith, he retired years and years and years ago, and people have tried to coax him out of it. He never would go for it. He didn't want to be in the limelight anymore. He wanted to be a rancher, which is exactly what he was. But him and Jimmy Dickens stayed good buddies, and them and their wives came back, and they're sitting out leaning against the Ryman, the backstage entrance, smoking cigarettes, and took me over to Tootsie's after it was over, and we had a beer together, and we talked about Hank. I mean, it was incredible. I got to perform for them.
Yeah.
They got to go back in time, and then we go across and have a beer at Tootsie's Orchid Lounge, and we have a beer and talk about old Hank. And it's, everybody, every night I ended up at Tootsie's after the show with somebody who wanted, whether they were just a fan, they wanted to go over there. But it was amazing, and you got everybody's Hank story. George Jones's Hank story of how he cried himself to sleep in his bunk, being a U.S. Marine, and he was in basic training, and he heard the news Hank had died, and he cried himself to sleep in his bunk, trying to hide it because he's supposed to be a Marine. You can't cry.
Yeah.
And come to find out at reunions 25 years later that everybody was crying, but no one told each other,
Yeah.
It's great moments like that really make it worth it,
Yeah, you probably have to look back at that in those times, doing the show then and getting all that information and getting all those people coming and telling you the stories. I'm sure as the show was going on, you were able to, every story, every time you meet somebody would give you something that would just give you that much more energy and much more fuel to kind of get really inside who Hank was and be able to deliver the goods.
Well, my dad instilled in me, he said, if you think you need to remember something, write it down.
Yeah.
Always write it down. He goes, I don't care where you write it down, just write it down, put it in your pocket. If it's something important, like if it's a witty line or a joke or something, if you write it down, it'll make that much more difference, because Dad was, he was that engineer, cut and dried, very anal retentive, write everything down, and the spaces had to be correct, But if he taught me anything, it was, hey, this may be important later on. Like these stories, these people are telling me, I could forget them, and I'm sure I have forgotten, that first couple of months, I didn't write them down.
Yeah.
And that's the first couple of months is when I met most of those people.
Yeah.
So I had to draw a memory to write a bunch of the first stories. But, after that, I wrote everything down. And, it's every memory I had, Kitty Wells talking about, them going to dinner with Hank and Audrey and the fights they would get into and things like that. And I wrote everything down that I could. And, I still write stuff down to this very day if I think I need to remember it.
Have you ever thought about writing a book?
Well, someone said that, but I said, no, I write shows. I mean, when I get old and, I might write, my memories as Hank Williams.
Yeah.
My memories
It'd be
as
an
Hank.
Interesting book there in a twist in a way where
It probably would. I don't know, how well it would sell, but, that wouldn't be the point of writing it. The point of writing it would be, hey, I'm not going to be here forever, so here's these stories that I heard, pass them on.
Yeah, because you probably know more stories in a whole, package than almost anybody. Everyone will have their story and they might have heard a couple, but the amount of stories that you would have heard combined is probably more than almost anybody.
I guess, I've never really sat and thought about it in that, I've heard people say write a book, and my knee-jerk reaction is, well, I write shows because I love to perform, and I'm still in good performing age and shape, so I want to keep doing this for years to come. And as you know, I've written 6 or 7 other shows that we've got up on the website that people can see, and they all contain the history of the story behind the song or the songwriter or the artist. Yeah. It's the story. That's what, from a very early age, I was a huge history buff. And that interests me more than someone standing on stage and singing song after song after song after song, because I can buy a record, or a CD now and download it if I just want to hear the music. But if I want to know the story behind it, how do I get Chris Christopherson? And he does that now.
Yeah.
Chris Christopherson now will tell you why he wrote Why Me, Lord, and it's an amazing story.
Yeah, and it gives you a whole new perspective of that song.
Yeah. Larry Gatlin writing, what is the name of the song? It's kind of like Why Me, Lord. Help Me?
Yes.
Help Me.
Yeah.
And Larry does one-man shows now, and he's a great guy. He's been through the ringer. He had his drinking and drug days, and he recovered from it. He's had vocal surgery. He's run the gamut, a massive comeback in the late 80s and early 90s with his brothers, and now he's out there doing a one-man show and, telling some of the stories behind the songs, and that's what interests me. And so all my shows are like that. So maybe one day I will write a book. This is an appeal to all publishers listening to the podcast.
Exactly. Give me a call.
Give me a call. And don't say you're Kitty Wells.
Yeah, that won't work anymore.
It won't.
So you finished up in at the Ryman in Nashville. You went off Broadway to New York as well, did you not?
Yeah, we did a couple of national tours, and then I got into one of those legend tribute shows because, for one, once the Hank stuff ended, the Lost Highway ended, there was nobody sitting right there ready to take it up again, and I had not yet gotten my stuff in order to go out and do shows on my own. Luckily, as fate would have it, and I don't say luckily for my dad was having to have heart surgery, so I came back to Nashville and was staying there with him, and there was a new show opening up at the Ernest Tubb record shop called Country Superstars, and it was an impersonator show.
Yeah,
and they wanted a couple of old country acts, so they got a Hank and a Patsy, a Hank Williams and a Patsy Cline, and they picked me for Hank. Then we were there, Dad recovered, and then the show went out to Nevada, and we played out there for like 6 more months. And I got to tell you, I had a real problem with doing an impersonator show because I don't want to be known as an impersonator.
Yeah.
Because I'm not.
No.
No, it's not what I do. But you should have seen the money they were offering me to go do an impersonator show when I didn't have any other options.
Yeah.
So I went and I took the money, like Hank Jr. said, he goes, I'll take your money, I'll make you a movie, but buddy, I was born to boogie. That's, I was born to act. I was born to do my own shows. I was born to tell the story. But, if somebody in Las Vegas calls and says, hey, we're going to pay you this big giant amount of money, we're going to pay for your meals and your room and board and your flight here and back, you go, is this Kitty Wells again? Who is this? Is this a joke? Of course I took it. And then after that, while I was in Nevada, I got a phone call from Randy Myler, the writer of Lost Highway. Mm-hmm. And he had seen the show at the Ryman, and he didn't like the version they had done because they had to clean it up. They had to take all the dark stuff out.
Yeah.
And he's a real gritty director. He's a great director. He's a great writer. And he writes from a very humanistic standpoint. But the other thing he does is he makes it interesting.
Yeah.
He makes it interesting. He doesn't, you're not bored with soliloquies for like 9 hours trying to develop the character. He can develop his characters quickly and very interestingly. And I loved what his original script. Well, he said, listen, he goes, you do a great job with Lost Highway, but he goes, I'm kind of torn as to whether you can do the real gritty stuff, but I want to give it a shot. I want this. He goes, you're the best Hank I've ever seen and I've ever heard. He said, but now we have to work on your acting chops. And he's the guy that I credit with, eventually the first place we went was the Cleveland Playhouse in Cleveland, Ohio. While we were there, and he worked with me in just constantly on things to do. So many people overact.
Yeah.
He said, talk to the audience or talk to the people on stage like we're talking right now. Talk like we're talking right now. Hear the inflection in your voice. He goes, don't put that, there's a ringing, there's a tone you can tell when a bad actor acts.
Yeah.
It's always kind of like this, my voice has changed and you can suddenly tell, but the actor doesn't know they're doing it.
Yeah.
But anybody that's watching it can go, oh, and start sinking in your seat. So he said, try to keep the same tone when you're talking on stage, that you're talking to me, because you're going to be mic'd. You don't have to, it's not like the old Broadway days where you have to project, where you have to shout almost, like we had to do in theater, like in my hometown of Manchester.
Yeah. They
don't have mics. So you got to shout. People got to be heard.
Yeah.
So we took it to Cleveland, The Lost Highway. It got great reviews. I loved the grittiness of it, the realness of it, even the darkness of it. And while we were there, an off-Broadway producer came to see the show, and he had a 175-seat off-Broadway theater called the Manhattan Ensemble Theater, but he wanted the show right then. And by this time, I was starting to get my stuff together, and booking my own shows.
Yeah.
And I had bookings. So I had bookings until American Thanksgiving, which is the third Thursday in November. And he had a limo come pick me up. I was in Massachusetts, Springfield, Massachusetts, where I ended my tour. He picked me up after the show and drove me straight to New York City. I got Thanksgiving Day off. And then the next day we woke up and we were in rehearsal for Lost Highway off Broadway.
Yeah.
We only had an initial 3-week run. Well, after the first week, the New York Times critic came, and I remember Randy Myler, the director. He said, "Don't get your hopes up. We're getting their worst. We're getting their most cynical, critic that they're bringing. He hates everything. So just don't take anything. Take everything with a grain of salt."
Yeah.
Guy loved it.
Oh, awesome.
Went nuts over it. Then Rolling Stone came. Then Entertainment Weekly came. Then Time Magazine came. Then, every New York Post, all the New York papers came out, Associated Press, everything. They loved the show. Within, I don't know, maybe a day of the New York Times review coming out, all of our shows were sold out for the 3-week run. He asked if we could extend for 3 weeks after Christmas. We said yes. Those sold out within the next week. So what happened was, after that run got finished, we took a 2-week hiatus because I had another gig in Las Vegas. This was stuff that was unforeseen, and I already had stuff booked. We took a 2-week hiatus, and another off-Broadway producer came in and took us to a larger theater, and we ran there for about 8 more months.
Wow.
I believe. I can't remember exactly how long it was, but you run and we're sold out at the beginning, and then as everybody who's going to come see it comes and sees it, the audiences began to fall off there in the beginning of summer, and by the end of the summer they made the decision, let's try and take it on the road. And they looked at me, and I still remember this conversation. It's the hardest decision I've ever had to make. Randy Myler, the guy who had basically given me, I got lucky enough to win the Obie Award, which was Off-Broadway's top acting award.
Yeah.
It's the equivalent to the Tony Award. Off-Broadway just means smaller houses. I mean, it's under 500 seats is Off-Broadway. Over 500 seats is considered a Broadway stage.
Yeah.
So I won the Obie. I was nominated in all of the other award shows where it pits off-Broadway versus Broadway, it's just Best Actor. And I was one of the 5 nominees, and it was me and Antonio Banderas and Harvey Fierstein.
Yeah.
He was doing Hairspray.
Wow.
And, of course, him and Antonio Banderas, who was doing 9, I think it was. I think it was 9. I don't remember. They won. And me and who was the guy in Rambo that played the sheriff? Brian.
Oh, gee, I don't remember.
Oh, man. Anyway, he was sitting beside me at dinner at one of these where we pitted the off-Broadway and the Broadway stars. He goes, you know you and I aren't going to win, right? I said, yeah, I kind of got that idea. He goes, this thing's already been decided. He goes, it's between the big dogs up there. Me and you are just the bit players. And I said, you know, I'm the bit player. I consider you a big dog because he's, Brian Dennehy.
Oh, there you go.
Brian Dennehy.
Yeah.
What a great actor and just a good guy. He sort of like took me under his wing at these dinners where I knew nobody.
Yeah.
And I'm a country kid from Tennessee, and I'm walking into New York, and in my first try at it, I'm up here where these people have labored for years, and they can't get to the table, and here I am going, what am I doing here? I really felt out of place there.
Yeah.
So I was lucky. I soaked it all in, and then when the end of the run came, and they said, our producers want to do a national tour, I just said, guys, I've done all I can do with the role. I mean, I really think I've done all I can do with it, and I need to. Something inside of me said, "You need to go and be the boss now. You need to go and do your own thing. You've got stories, you've got the talent, now you've got the connections, and you've got a little music business sense behind you.
Yeah.
Do you want to be an actor and go to 20 auditions every week and maybe get one part? And you're a Southerner, you've got to draw. You're not going to get a lot of parts in New York City.
Yeah.
So after toying around with a guy who wanted to manage me for a while, and that didn't go very well, it did get me to Branson.
Yeah.
And that's where I put the finishing touches on my very first Hank and My Honky Tonk Heroes show in Branson, Missouri at the Mo Bandy Theater, and that was 2004. And from there, I got an agent, and I've been doing my own shows and building my repertoire and meeting good people like you and Brian.
Yeah, it's a great story to get where you are now. You figure how long just you've been being able to do the Hank part, because there's not probably too many people out there who get put into a part and stick with it that long and be able to make a full career out of it. And you have, and it's partially because you do it so well. And it's interesting you talk about not being a, whatever you want to call it, a tribute artist or impersonator.
I don't mind being called a tribute artist.
Yeah,
it's an impersonator.
Yeah.
That's sort of a dirty word because I think of Rich Little. I don't do any other voices. I'm an actor who learned to sing and sound like Hank Williams. It's my dad's fault that I look like him, but it's if I were to go in a room, like I got a friend by the name of Johnny Counterfeit, an amazing impressionist. And an impressionist is a great word instead of impersonator, because he looks like Johnny Counterfeit, but he does an amazing Johnny Cash, and he does Archie Bunker, and I listened to him do Archie Bunker when I did mine at the Opryland theme park, but that the impersonator word just kind of, the first thing you think of is Rich. I think Rich Little all the time. Yeah, because he was like the world's most famous impressionist or impersonator. But it's not really what I do. But you want to wave a bunch of money at me, I'll try it. I'll give it my shot.
So what was it like now after working for other people and being on Broadway at the Ryman, and now you're the boss and heading out and doing shows on your own? What type of difference was that for you? Was it scary, or is it something that just kind of found the place and it felt really comfortable for you?
I think the great thing is that I got married in 2002, and so that really focused me. That helped make the decision in 2003 not to continue with Lost Highway. But I have since done a production with Randy Myler of Lost Highway. We got back together and did it in 2014 in Annapolis, Maryland, because, I was talking to him all the time, and I said, if it ever comes up and my schedule's open, I just don't want to go on an extended tour, but I'll go do a sit down anywhere, and but getting married focused me. Getting married, it sort of empowered me that now I can't just think about me.
Yeah.
What's best for me. But my wife and I, we didn't have kids. Our first kid was in 2007. So she traveled with me for the first, 5 years of me trying to get my stuff together. And we had to, we knew we had to shed ourselves of all these so-called managers and people that wanted to push you in this direction and do that. We had to sit down and go, what do we do best? What can we do? What do I love to do? I love history, and I'm good at doing Hank Williams stuff. I love the old country because I've met them all. They've all since passed away, but I've met them all. I've heard their stories. I have a deep love and appreciation for those people. Not so much for, country music history, but for those people.
Yeah.
Because in the end, it's not about a building in Nashville that has a museum in it. It's about the people and why they're in that museum, why and how they affected other people. And that's, my grandmother had a great storytelling ability, and I inherited that. My dad introduced me to Hank Williams. The first song I ever heard was Hey Good Lookin'.
Yeah.
He sang it to me. So it was very easy. It transitioned easier than it probably should have. It's always, there's always the business side of it, which is the kind of dirty part of it, is just like finding an agent and, trying to keep the next, you don't book for now. You know this very well. You got your own theater, but you book for 2 years from now.
Yeah.
So you hope you get a bunch of gigs here to keep you running for a year. Then you start looking. We're at the point now where we are now booking for the fall, winter of 2019 pretty heavily right now, and I've booked things as far away. My furthest booking right now is in May of 2020, and it's on the books. So that's a year and a half from now. So we got it to that point, but in the beginning it was tough just getting the next month or two's.
Yeah.
Because no one books a month or two in advance. Everyone books 6 or 10 months in advance, or even further.
Yeah. So getting going, it's hard because it's like you say, you just can't call someone or, is there something next week? I know I get calls and different emails to the theater, and people want to say, hey, do you have anything available for the summer? We'd like to come in. And I'm like, well, I've already booked the next year already.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can't even think about this year, and let alone next year. Give me a call in a year, and I'll look at the year after that.
Right.
And
you're booking into 2020 right now, aren't you?
About to start. Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to say you're way ahead of the schedule for a lot of people. And that's always when you're in a good spot, is when you're booking that far out. But you're talking about the struggle is at the beginning when you get started. I guess when you guys, you're from the Walters family, you guys used to tour.
Yeah.
And my guess is getting that thing started was no easy bargain either.
No, I mean, we started really young. So it was a gradual thing. And most of our touring ended up being summertime based because we were all still in school. Mm-hmm. So it was a little different. And I think at the time we were out doing shows, obviously I was young, so I wasn't really part of any of the financial end of things. It was something we did and we enjoyed it, and it was something we were working on, but I don't think it was something we were doing to make a living. I wasn't, at 12 looking for my, income to come in and, knowing this is going to be a payday or not. This wasn't part of something I thought about, but then eventually it turned into that. So for us, it was a little different. It was gradual. It was something that we did, and it built and it built and it built and built. So at the beginning, we didn't really have to think, okay, this is something we have to get out, and now we have to make money at this and pay the bills and make a living. Because, my dad had a job, and he was an upholsterer, and he did that. We had a little farm, and so, I didn't even know what our finances were. I still wouldn't even. We should talk about that with the family, because I'd like to know. I said, what did we actually, were we counting on this to survive? I'm sure it helped. It was part of it. I know at some point we got so busy, my dad had to decide, well, do I need to keep this upholstery business going? Because it's really, he didn't have time for it. So that ended up, stopping for him. And so I know that at that point, it was viable. But I know for a position like you, you decide, okay, now let's do our own show. You're not sitting on a year's worth of income to kind of cushion yourself and say, well, we'll just work our way into this.
Right. But having that, I got a year and a half, a year and a half's worth of work in front of me. That's good. Yeah. Now you can hit, like, if a booking comes in for 6 months from now and I've got that date open, those are great. Those little one-offs that come in, that's the filler. You go out and you get the big stuff, and then the fillers come in, and those are always beautiful and wonderful, and, stuff drops out of the sky all the time because I've been out there doing it for so long, and people know who I am and what I do. And so that's I'm trying to branch out. I'm doing a new show, and it's called Every Song Tells a Story, and it focuses fully on the song and the songwriter. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to, part of it's going to be country music. And of course, there's going to be Hank Williams. We're going to talk about that some. But then there's others, we'll do Chris Christopherson. Then we'll go, I'm going to do Gordon Lightfoot, Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, because it's one of those old sort of folk ballads that actually does tell a story. I mean, it tells the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. Harry Chapin, Cats in the Cradle. Great songs like that. And we even do "Devil Went Down to Georgia," which is it's a story song. It's a made up story. Yeah, but it's a great story. And to me, I love that. And so we're branching out a little bit, but I still want to do. You have to know in this business what you do best, and then you have to go and give it everything you got. Yeah, you can't go halfway. You can't go to, well, I'll go experiment with this and say, you shouldn't. I mean, you can go experiment with stuff, but if you do, give it everything you got. Yeah. Don't go and go, well, I'll go see what happens, and walk in with that kind of attitude. Nothing's going to happen. Yeah. You have to, so know what you are, know who you are, know what you do best, and then focus on getting that out there to people who can book you. I mean, getting that information in front of venues, getting that information out to fans so they'll come see you. And getting booked is the easy part. Getting the people in the seats is another part. It's Hank Williams has been dead, over 60 years now, I think. Yeah, so almost 60 years. So, are we getting the people that saw Hank Williams? Not so much, but we're getting the sons and the daughters of the people that Hank Williams meant so much to. And they use this show as a remembrance and an homage to their parents or grandparents. They heard it as kids.
You hear that a lot. I can hear from people, and they're talking about, this is the song that my dad used to, or my grandpa used to sing all the time. And it means a lot to them because that's part of their memory. Mm-hmm. And they come to the show as a remembrance to them. I mean, they end up enjoying the show and loving it, but there's something that takes them back. And that's, a part of a lot of these shows now that you can go see. I know when we tour this Oh What a Night show, the Frankie Valli show, a lot of those people are the same thing. Those are the songs that they remember their childhood from and growing up. And those are the good times, right? That's when you're carefree. You weren't worrying as much about
bills
and bills and all that stuff. So that it's a good spot in your brain to remember, right?
Yep.
Now, I know you talk about your dad a lot. You had a really good relationship with your dad, didn't you?
Yeah. I still do, but he's been gone for like 2 years, and I named my son after him.
Yeah.
And that made him very happy. Dad was diagnosed with Parkinson's in 2006, so I moved back home to Manchester, my hometown, because after living in New York and Nashville and Los Angeles and Branson, my wife and I decided to start a family. We moved back because Dad had been diagnosed. And usually with Parkinson's, it depends on the person's age when they get Parkinson's. Like Michael J. Fox still living with it after, 25, 30 years. Dad was about 70, 72 when he got diagnosed, and we knew for a person that age, it would eventually rob him of his ability to walk and feed himself and all those other things. So, and once he became incapacitated to the point where he couldn't walk, he had to be bedridden all the time. Eventually, pneumonia got him. That's what got him. You're in a bed and you can't do anything about it.
Yeah.
So I went home and, stayed with him as much as I could and got him a good place, and people take good care of him. And, I missed the heck out of him, but, I missed the heck out of my grandfather. I missed the heck out of my grandmother. My mom died when I was 7. So my family immediately got closer.
Yeah.
It was me and my dad's mom and my grandfather, and they had a farm, and I spent half my time on the farm because Dad worked as at engineering, and so I would go spend my summers with them and then come home. My grandmother would come with me, and she'd stay 3 weeks at our house and then go back home for 3 weeks, and it was just until my dad remarried my stepmom. There was a period there where the 4 of us just got immensely close, and to me those are those great times.
Yeah.
So I do these shows, and as you know, I include all of those people in my shows: my grandmother, my grandfather, and my dad, and because they meant so much to me. And so being on stage, not only it really is a labor of love, because I get to take them with me everywhere I go, and not everyone is that fortunate. I get to include my story. You get to hear a lot of my story in the Hank story.
Yeah, without almost realizing it's happening.
Yeah,
which is kind of neat.
Which I hope is the way it happens.
Yeah,
somebody's going to say, "Shut up and talk about Hank," but you try to. We have a lot of similarities. He had a strong mother figure, and I had a strong father figure. It's just one of those things. I spent my summers on farms, learning farm stuff, and we didn't have, we weren't poor. Hank was born into abject poverty, and he had to write about what he knew. But it's one of we're all from the South. We have that same Southern sensibility and that Southern wit and that laid back sort of style. We don't get too worried about too much, so it fits. It feels like a. I like to treat the stage like a front porch, and I like to say, "Hey guys, let's all gather around and share some stories and sing some songs together."
Yeah,
that's the way I like to make the audience feel.
Yeah, it works really well, and I enjoy hearing that. I've heard the stories obviously a bunch of times now. But I still, every time I listen to it, I get a little something more from it. And I think maybe because you hear it over and over again, you start getting a little bit more in depth into your thought about it. And, certainly an interesting life. And, you portray it really, really well. I can see you can slip into that role really quick now. I see you backstage and then you come out and bam, you're right into that role. It's pretty well become a part of who you are now, and it really comes across on stage really nicely. People, obviously, you probably hear a lot of people post show because you always go out and meet people. Mm-hmm. You must hear that, but you must hear a lot of people's stories about Hank all the time, just post show from.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Well, and I hear the same things that you're hearing. I hear, the first song I learned to sing was, "Hey, good looking," or "I saw the light," or "You're cheating heart," or, one of those just timeless songs. Yeah. And so many people are amazed. because you don't go to a show by yourself. So you want to drag your kids or your spouse or your friends, and maybe they don't want to go, but they will go with you, and they go, and they're more amazed at the performance than the person who liked the Hank Williams songs to start with.
Yeah.
They're like, oh my God, I didn't know Hank wrote I Saw the Light. I didn't know Hank wrote You're Cheating Hard. I didn't know he wrote Jambalaya, that old Cajun song. I didn't know he wrote all these songs. Yeah, he did in the short 29 years. And it is pretty amazing the things that we hear. He touches something that there's very few performers, Elvis is one of them. And the mystique that Elvis holds over some people amazes me.
Yeah.
And it's the same way to a lot lesser degree with Hank, but Hank felt more real, because Elvis didn't write a bunch of his own songs. He wrote a couple. I think he wrote Don't Be Cruel and a couple others or something like that. Or I don't know what all songs he's credited with writing, but he could make you feel them.
Yeah.
He was just amazing. He was a performer ahead of his time, but he was more of an entertainer. Hank was more of a real down to earth human being who gave us a part of his soul.
Yeah, it's interesting, doing these shows across the West here, and I always like going out, checking into the audience during intermission and after the show, and you hear over and over again. I've heard people coming in to these theaters, and I heard a guy the other night. Yep, this is my first time here at the theater. I didn't even know it was here, and it's beautiful theater downtown. It's vibrant and it's very busy, and this show pulls people out to come to a place they've never been before, never been to the theater to see any show. Right. Or I heard the other night, same thing. A guy came in and says, yep, I've never seen any show here that I wanted to see besides this one. And the theater's been there for years. But that Hank is the thing that brought someone out to a venue and to a theater in a small town, and they've probably never gone to see any other live show. And it's amazing. And the other night, last night, it was great walking out intermission, and you seen there's an older fella in front of me, and it ended up being his daughter. He goes, "Come on, Dad. Well, it's going to probably be another, I think the show will finish up around 9:00. Is that going to be all right?" And it was like, it just kind of made your heart kind of, I've connected with them right away, because it was like, oh, you're bringing your dad out to see this show. He's probably never been to see a show in ages. And then another guy the other night, it was really great. He came up to me and said, "We're looking forward to this show." I says, "Yep." I said, "It's nice to have you here. I hope you have a good time." I said, "Yep." He says, "My neighbor brought me." And I said, "Oh, that's nice." And I looked over, and here's this younger lady. It's this fella's neighbor. He probably has no one to take him. Right. And she knew he wanted to see this, and he probably asked, "Would you be able to take me?" And she said, "Yeah." And that was really neat. I mean, you hear these little stories that you get these old folks that are coming, and they know they really want to see the story and hear the songs, and these people are bringing them out. And it's a great story either way. It's great that the people are doing it, bringing them there, and it's great that these people want to see the show. So it's pretty neat. I've been enjoying seeing that aspect of taking the show out on the road. It's neat.
Well, and the thing is they give you all this love.
Yeah.
They give you all this love. I mean, and you've seen it in the shows. Man, they really get into the show, and they really love the show, and they laugh at the just dumb jokes that I tell, and the anecdotes are funny. The things that happen in Hank's life. Like Audrey telling Hank that he had $1 million worth of talent and a 10-cent brain. Those are anecdotes that come from years of me listening. But they give you love. And Minnie Pearl, I got to meet Minnie Pearl years and years ago, and she said one thing that the old solemn judge at the Opry told her when she was like 22 years old. She was making her debut on the Opry. She was so nervous.
Yeah.
And he said, "Just love them, honey, and they'll love you back."
Yeah.
So that's what I try to do. I try to go love my audience and love Hank Williams, and I love the people who knew Hank Williams, and I try to love my audience and convey that to them, and they do. They love you back. They really do. And it's, there's this lady who came to see us at the Ryman, and she came to last night's show, and she's already bought tickets for the Monday night and the Tuesday night show, and she lives 3 hours away.
Yeah, and she's got to go over to the island to go see.
Yeah, she's got to.
It's like it's not an easy place to get to.
Got to take a ferry or a plane, and it's amazing what people will do when you give them good entertainment in something that's not just ear candy. Something that hits them deep, and it means a lot. And I've always wanted to do something meaningful with my life. I mean, I know as a young kid, do something, make a difference, and I think we're making a difference. I think we do. I think we do something very deep and very meaningful. And people. I know people in my hometown. Whether they think anything about this or not, or I don't know what my neighbors think or whatever, but I feel I'm just another guy. I'm just a guy, and I'm out there trying to help people just have 2 hours of warmth and love and remembrance and good times. And that's exactly what we do.
Yeah, and what makes you different too, it's not that you've had a career or trying to have a career and you decided to do a tribute to someone to get some gigs.
No.
You know what I mean? There's a lot of those people out there. It's like, well, let's put a tribute show together and try to get some work. Guess it's not working out any other way. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's a different thing.
It is a different thing.
You're from an honest place with it, and it's a different. I've mentioned before that tribute shows are difficult because they run in so many different levels, and there's really good tribute shows. There's some that, like I just mentioned, that just people are doing it just to try to do a gig, and it doesn't come from an honest place. It comes from what can I do to make money,
right?
And it shows in the performance. It really does.
Well, thank you. I know that big decision was part of me and my wife. My wife's name is Hope, and I better get my kids' names in here too. Lorelei and James Petty. Both, if they're listening to the podcast, they'll be mad if I don't mention their names. But
and
my wife,
you talk about them all the time.
All the time in the shows. They're part of the shows as well.
Yeah.
But that decision came before my wife and I had kids. And I remember her saying, "Do you want to chase stardom and fame and money, or do you want to do something that you already love and gets, and she said, but I'm with you either way."
Yeah.
But she said, if it were me, she said, I would do what I love to do. And, we'll always find a way to get by, There's two of us, and she has a job. She doesn't get paid nearly enough for it. She's a full-time mom.
Yeah.
That's a job. That's a heck of a job. I wouldn't want it. And she does an amazing job. And she also teaches kids at the local theater. She does the We Actors Guild. She's the head of We Actors Guild. And she has 2 different casts of 50 kids. And no kid is ever turned away. Every kid gets a part in a show that auditions.
Wow.
So if 100 people show up, 100 people's going to be in the show. I mean, it's, these are these big Shrek Junior and things like that. She puts every kid in there because that's what community theater's supposed to be.
Yeah, you're supposed to there to find your place.
It's supposed to be fun and a learning experience, and find out if that's what you want to do.
Yeah.
If you want to keep doing it, great. If you don't, well, you've tried it. You gave it a shot.
Well, take a look at you. You probably, when you're young, you were working at Pfizer, and you probably weren't thinking this is what your life was going to be. You didn't have these grand thoughts of being a big country music star. It just you were given an opportunity and you were able to find out, hey, this is, there's just a path that you got led down, and it was, it wasn't something that you had to do some big audition and spend all your life trying to work towards it. There was an opportunity that happened, and it worked out for you.
Yeah, I tell people I tripped into this somehow. If I try to go back and get into my 23-year-old mind, what were my plans for the future? I have no idea. I can't even step back into that guy. You're so different at 23 than you are now at my age, 29. And a half. Anyway, that was 20, 30 years ago. That was, almost 30 years ago. So your mentality, and kids change everything. A wife changes things to a certain degree. Getting married, then you got to think about us instead of me.
Yeah.
Then your kids come along. That totally, if you had any twinklings on the outside of, well, if someone ever called and said, I'd like you to go do this movie in L.A. and let's get you an agent and start trying to get you, I could be persuaded to whatever. Then the kids come along. Then you start thinking about, all right, we got to pay for college. We got to do that. We got to do it. So what do I do best? Let's focus on it and only it. But I've told my wife, and she knows this, and my kids, my dream is always to be, and that's why I love what you do so much. You've got that theater. There's a place in Tennessee called Pigeon Forge, and it's Dollywood's there. I said, if I could ever get my own theater and do sort of a history of country music, sort of like, and it would be almost like going back to old Opryland days, except it would be about a 2-hour show with an intermission thing in there. And it would have the old setting from the old days, and it would bring you into every different era, and you would explain, why country music had to change. Patsy Cline and Jim Reeves were so popular because rock and roll came along and killed the old-timey country music. It killed it. And so suddenly Chet Atkins and Owen Bradley, the famous producers, decided to add strings and make it more popish, and suddenly country music was hip again, So, and it's fabulous things about the ebb and flow of country music trying to always make its comeback, and it always being considered the music of the old poor country boy. Well, that's not always the case. And I would love to have a sit-down theater in somewhere like Pigeon Forge, or not necessarily Branson, that seems too far, but somewhere like that, and just have my kids help me kind of, that's why every time I pass a big barn, I said, hey, Darren, you need to buy that place. That's your new theater. I'm just in awe of what you've been able to put together there. And that's what attracts me to that. And I know you guys only do it, during the summer months.
Yeah.
But still, that's kind of like what Pigeon Forge does. They want a big Christmas spectacular, but I'd love to be there just for the summer months, and just do a sit down there, because I think what we do in the heart of the Smoky Mountains would be a great thing. If I have any other dream than to keeping doing what I'm doing now on the road, that would be it. That's the only dream you're allowed to have when you have children.
Have a nice sit down where you can come home at night, or later on at night at some point, or be home during the day, or be able to take them to school in the morning, and
have the kids help with the theater.
Yeah, and be a part of it.
And be a part of the show later on as they get older. If they get interested in music, they can do it.
Yeah.
I don't want to ever pressure my kids to follow doing what I do. I want them to make their own way. That's my father's best. He never pressured me to become an engineer.
Yeah.
He never pressured me. He said, always take care of first things first. The other stuff will come.
Yeah.
And that's what he meant by, putting food on the table and doing this and doing that. And then, other opportunities will come. And I learned a lot from him. I learned a lot from my grandparents' work ethic. And I think I'm using that work ethic now in a different field that maybe wasn't even geared toward this work ethic at first, because this is such an opportunity-based field that putting your head down and going at it, well, if you don't have the talent or you don't have the connections, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So it's worked out good so far, and I hope it keeps working out for years to come.
Well, you certainly can tell when you do a show that when you go out there, and I've seen enough of them now, that you never phone it in. It's, if not stays super consistent, it gets better as it goes. You can tell that, when you hit the stage, you're not going to go anywhere and see you, and it's going to be a lesser performance because of some reason, or, maybe there's a smaller crowd tonight for some particular reason. You don't hold back. It makes you work even harder. And yeah, that's a work ethic trait as well. And you're there to do a job, and you deliver. If there's 5,000 people there or 500 people there, it doesn't really matter.
And I try to put that mindset of, like you said about that old guy that got his neighbor to take him.
Yeah.
I think before I go on, I try to envision the people that are coming and the reasons they're here.
Yeah.
I do that. I say a quick prayer, and then, how an actor gets in, you want to be left alone for the 15 minutes before that. Like before Lost Highway, I don't want to be talking to somebody about, what I saw on the internet today, or what Donald Trump said about the, or what about the left or the right or politics or religion or anything. I want to get in my little cocoon, and I want to go, think. I want to thank God for giving me the opportunity to do this. But I also want to think, who would be coming to this show tonight? That man or that woman who's coming, who's, never stepped into the theater before. Why are they coming? Are you gonna give them the half-baked show? You better not. I don't care how you're feeling. I don't care if your stomach's upset or you got a fever. And I've only done one show where I had a fever, and I was sick, and it was down in Alabama. And as soon as I hit that stage, that fever went away. And as soon as I stepped off that stage, the fever came back. But I mean, for those 2 hours, that adrenaline got rid of it.
Yeah. It's like having to pee before you go on stage.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well,
for me, I've had that many times. Like, oh, God, and then you just hit the stage, and then an hour later,
and in the minute you walk off,
it's like, okay, I got to go again.
I got to go.
But
right
what happened
now
to that last hour? Your brain.
You don't think about it.
Yeah.
You don't think
about it. That shows you really how your brain can really, if you can harness as much energy or thought in your brain and as much as possible, you can make your body do anything. Because obviously, right at that moment, if you were to sit there,
I don't know that that's totally true. I can't make my body do everything anymore, but
some things.
I give it a shot.
Well, anyways, I'm hungry.
I'm starving to death.
Yeah, we should go have dinner. And I really enjoyed this. This was a
now
nice chat.
As Paul Harvey used to say, the rest of the story.
So where can people find out and look and find Jason Petty on the interwebs?
They would go to Jason Petty, JASONPETTY.com, and you can learn everything you need to know, plus stuff you could even care less about me and my career. And you'll read some of the reviews and some of the quotes from some of the people I knew, like Don Helms, and you can listen to clips of some of the songs on my CDs that we have, and you can email me if you'd like to purchase a CD. You can just email me. I mean, I don't actually put them for purchase on the website. I always hated being a salesman. We were talking about this the other day. I hated being a salesman. I hated it. I felt like I was intruding, that people didn't want you there. Yeah. I don't even put my stuff for sale on the website because A, I don't think it would generate enough money to make a difference, and B, I don't want to be intrusive. So if you want a CD, you email me. We'll talk about how much it is. You send me a check, and I'll send you a CD. It's as simple as I can get it. It's the old Sears and Roebuck method.
Well, excellent. I had a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward. We got a couple more shows left on this tour, and you're coming back next year to the Walters Theater as well with a new show. And
very near and dear to my heart. As a matter of fact, it's a country gospel show.
Yeah.
And of course, I Saw the Light's going to be in the show by Hank Williams. It has to be.
Yeah, there's a lot of them.
Will the Circle Be Unbroken? There's a ton, On the Wings of a Snow White Dove. There's tons of country gospel hits. And I was raised in Church of Christ, my grandmother, and then I was in the Methodist in the choir. So, man, I've got them coming from all angles from
Awesome.
a religious standpoint. So, and again in this show, just like all the other shows, you're going to hear the stories behind the songs and why they were written. Most of them you can guess why they were written, but the great story is that I Saw the Light, which was his mama inspired it. But you'll have to wait for that one.
Excellent. All right. Thanks again. And make sure you check out Jason Petty wherever he is. If you have a chance to go see the show, make sure you do. It's fantastic. And we're going to go eat. So let's end this. Thanks, Jason.
Thank you so much. If the good Lord's willing and the creeks don't rise, I hope to talk to you again soon.
Awesome.